Đùm nhảy tới khi chứ là được rồi. Dễ đúng không? Ông chỉ gì đó đi được. Mấy này mình sợ.
Imagine waking up to the sound of rain. Not gentle rain, but the kind that slams against rooftops like fists. Now imagine that rain turning into rivers. Imagine those rivers rising so fast you can watch the water climb your doorway inch by inch. And just when you think the flooding is the worst it can get, the ground itself begins to move. That's what happened in central Vietnam. In a single 48-hour window, the region was hit by a perfect storm of disasters, biblical flooding, sudden landslides that swallowed entire hillsides and tornadoes, ripping roofs into the air like paper. Hue, a peaceful historic city, recognized by UNESCO, disappeared under 15 feet of water. Da Nang was torn apart by flash floods so powerful they stranded farmers on cliffs near a hydropower dam. In Quang Tri, a coal truck was swept off a spillway bridge like a toy. And in the mountains, slopes that had held steady for decades gave way without warning, burying homes, roads, and entire work camps. Families fled in the dark with nothing but the clothes they were wearing. Rescue crews fought currents strong enough to flip boats. Villages turned into islands. Highways collapsed. Tornadoes shredded entire neighborhoods already underwater. This wasn't just a disaster, it was a multi-layered weather onslaught that pushed an entire region to its breaking point. The kind of event you think only happens once in a century, until it happens again. And the scariest part, it all unfolded faster than anyone expected. Proof that even in a world already used to extreme weather, nature can still find ways to shock us. The disaster began with rain, not the kind that builds slowly over days, but a relentless wall of water that hammered central Vietnam hour after hour. By dawn on November 17th, entire districts from Hue to Quang Tri were already drowning. In Hue, a city known worldwide for its ancient temples and quiet riverside streets, the floodwaters didn't just rise, they exploded upward, swallowing neighborhoods in a matter of minutes. Some areas saw water depths of 15 to 16 feet high enough to reach second-story windows and bury entire markets beneath a brown, churning sea. Major roads vanished instantly. National Highway 1. Vietnam's main north-south lifeline was cut off by landslides and deep water. Boats replaced cars on what used to be busy streets. Families stacked sandbags at their doors, only to watch the water surge over them like they weren't even there. In low-lying wards such as Phong Dien and Phong Mai, the current was so strong that rescue teams needed ropes to anchor themselves just to reach stranded residents. Reservoirs upstream were forced to release water to prevent dam failures pushing even more water into already flooded towns. Entire communities were caught between rising river levels and controlled discharges from hydropower stations, trapped in a flood zone, with no safe direction to escape. And as the rain intensified, the power grid began to collapse. Thousands of homes went dark, sirens echoed across the city, and the storm made one thing clear: the worst was only beginning. As the rain kept pounding, the region, central Vietnam's river systems began to mutate into something unrecognizable. The Perfume River, usually a calm ribbon of water flowing through Hue's historic heart, surged past its highest danger thresholds. Gauges showed levels rising at terrifying speed, pushing toward 16 to 18 feet above normal, forcing emergency officials to declare the highest flood alert across multiple provinces. Upstream, the Bow River and the Thach Han River burst their banks, pouring violent currents straight into neighborhoods that had already been underwater for hours. By mid-morning, hundreds of villages were cut off. Streets once lined with homes, shops, and street food vendors transformed into fast-moving rivers, their surfaces littered with debris, toppled motorbikes, tree branches, and roofing metal ripped from houses. In Phong Dien district, the flood was so deep, over 5 meters, 16.4 feet, in the worst pockets, that rooftops were the only visible landmarks. People climbed onto them, waving flashlights and shirts, desperately signaling rescue teams who struggled to reach them against the fierce current. One of the worst-hit areas was Quang Tri, where water levels rose so fast that residents described the flood as a wall coming toward you. A coal truck crossing a spillway bridge was swept away, despite weighing several tons, dragged like a toy down a raging red-brown torrent. Spillway crossings, small bridges, and back roads disappeared under 3 to 6 feet of water, turning entire border villages into isolated islands. Agriculture, the backbone of thousands of families, was devastated in mere hours. Rice fields vanished under muddy water. Livestock drowned as barns filled too quickly for owners to react. In some places, more than 3 feet of water swept across farmland so violently that entire crops were ripped from the soil. The more it rained, the more the rivers rose. And the more the rivers rose, the more entire communities were forced to make an impossible choice: stay and risk being swallowed by the flood, or flee through pitch-black water with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Just as floodwaters overwhelmed the lowlands, another threat exploded across Vietnam's mountainous district. Landslides, violent, sudden, and impossible to outrun. Saturated soil, soaked with more than 10+ inches of non-stop rain, began to give way. Entire hillsides, some hundreds of feet tall, collapsed without warning. In Nam Tra My district, the mountains groaned before a massive sheet of earth broke loose. Locals standing nearby watched as a roaring avalanche of mud rocks and trees tore down the slope in seconds, burying a section of National Highway 40B under tons of debris. A motorbike parked along the shoulder disappeared instantly beneath the slide. Its rider had escaped only moments earlier. Hundreds of miles to the south in Can Hoa province, the destruction was even more deadly. On a winding mountain pass connecting the coastal city of Nha Trang to the Central Highlands, a landslide crashed down onto a passenger bus carrying 32 people. The impact crushed the vehicle trapping passengers as mud and boulders poured over it. Rescue teams fought through the night, but the storm kept triggering secondary slides, blocking both ends of the pass, and trapping emergency crews in a race against time. At least 6 people were killed, and many more were injured. Elsewhere, isolated farm shelters disappeared under collapsing slopes. Hillsides that locals had worked on for generations simply crumbled. More than 40 separate landslides across the region severed major highways, buried rural roads, and cut off lifelines between towns. Emergency responders often had to trek on foot through unstable terrain, knowing that the same hills that had already collapsed could fall again at any moment. The mountains were no longer stable. The ground itself had turned against the people living on it, cracking, sliding, and reshaping entire landscapes in minutes. And all of it was happening while floodwaters continued rising below. Just when Vietnam thought the storm could not become any more violent, the skies unleashed a new threat: tornadoes, ripping through communities already drowning in floodwater. In the late hours of November 16th, as rain hammered the region and lightning split the sky, a sudden funnel cloud touched down in Chien Dan Commune, tearing through the village with the force of a freight train. The tornado carved a path nearly 1,600 feet long, ripping the roofs off 56 homes in seconds. Metal sheets spun through the air like knives. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Power poles slumped sideways, taking entire electrical lines down with them and plunging neighborhoods into darkness. 4 residents were injured by flying debris, bruised, battered, but incredibly still alive. And that wasn't the last one. Another twister formed to the north in Huang Tra Ward, shredding the roofs of 28 more homes and scattering debris across streets already buried under floodwater. Emergency crews, exhausted from days of non-stop rescues, rushed out with chainsaws and floodlights, clearing blocked roadways until nearly 1 a.m. Just hours later, they would have to respond again as new layers of floodwater surged in from upstream. These tornadoes hit communities that were already on the brink: homes soaked through, families, displaced, roads washed out, and power systems failing. The storms didn't just damage buildings, they shattered any sense of stability residents had left. In a region accustomed to typhoons and monsoon floods, tornadoes remain rare and terrifying. Yet here they were, forming in the same storm system that brought historic rainfall, deadly landslides, and catastrophic flooding. For the people of central Vietnam, this was no longer just a flood. It was a convergence of disasters, water, wind, and earth, all turning against them in the same terrible week. As floodwaters swallowed the lowlands, an equally deadly threat struck the mountains: massive landslides, triggered by days of unending rain. In the steep districts of central Vietnam, the ground could no longer hold. Hillsides, saturated like a soaked sponge, began to crack and then collapse without warning. On November 16th, a violent landslide thundered down National Highway 40B in Nam Tra Mai district. Within seconds, an entire section of slope, thousands of cubic feet of mud rocks and broken trees slammed across the road. A motorbike was swallowed. Bystanders fled for their lives as the hillside continued to crumble, cascading all the way down toward a nearby stream. Rescue teams described it as a wall of earth collapsing in one breath. But the destruction didn't stop there. In Hung Son Commune, a second landslide struck even harder and under clear skies. After weeks of heavy storms, the weakened soil finally gave way. A huge chunk of mountainside collapsed, burying 5 farm huts, crushing 200 yards of roadway, and sweeping debris more than 0.6 miles downhill. 3 workers vanished under the avalanche of mud and boulders. Search teams worked round the clock for 2 days, battling unstable slopes and knee-deep sludge, but the terrain made every hour more dangerous. Across Quang Tri province, new landslides choked off entire transportation networks. Sections of roads disappeared under 3 feet of water and mud. Spillway bridges vanished under raging currents, cutting off villages like An Bai and An Rong from the outside world. Flash floods hit so fast that cars and trucks were lifted off the ground and swept away. One coal truck was dragged downstream in seconds, the driver trapped inside as rescue forces struggled to reach the site. Every hillside became a hazard, every road a gamble, every minute a race against collapsing earth. For thousands of residents, the mountains, once a symbol of stability, turned into one of the deadliest dangers of the disaster. The storms may pass, the floodwaters may fall, and the landslides may finally settle. But the message they leave behind is impossible to ignore. What happened in central Vietnam isn't just a local disaster. It's a snapshot of a world where extreme weather hits faster, harder, and with fewer warnings than ever before. Entire towns submerged, families displaced, lives changed forever in a single night. And yet, through the chaos, one thing remained unshaken: people helping people. Soldiers carrying children through chest-deep water. Neighbors pulling strangers to safety. Volunteers risking everything to reach the missing. In the darkest hours, courage rose higher than the floodwaters. If this story moved you, hit like to support real on-the-ground reporting. Share this video so more people understand what communities are facing around the world. Subscribe for more true stories of survival resilience and a changing planet. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think disasters like this are still once in a generation? Or are they becoming the new normal? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think, because every storm leaves a warning. The real question is, are we listening?